My sister was the undisputed bimbo of our family. Gorgeous, fragile, and utterly brainless, or so everyone chose to believe. Every time I brought a boyfriend home, she had a habit of forgetting we had company and changing her clothes with her bedroom door wide open. That was how my first 2 relationships ended. The first guy couldn't keep his eyes off her, turning bright red as he lingered in the hallway. I dumped him on the spot. The second one pretended he hadn't seen a thing, but by midnight, he was DMing my sister on Instagram, asking if she was cold in that skimpy silk camisole and offering to buy her a jacket. When I broke down in tears and confronted my mother, she slammed her hand on the kitchen table. "Chloe is just naive," she snapped. "If she were doing it on purpose, do you think she'd forget to shut the door every single time? She doesn't have a malicious bone in her body." My father chimed in, dismissive as always. "With your sister's IQ, Bridget, what is there to even argue about? Stop being so sensitive." So, for 3 years, I stopped dating entirely. Until I met Derek. He was the most grounded, no-nonsense man I had ever known. His eyes were sharp, clear, and entirely free of the typical male pretension. When I finally brought him home for Christmas dinner, I pulled Chloe aside before we even crossed the threshold, practically begging her. "Keep your clothes on, keep your door locked. Please." Chloe nodded sweetly, her large, doe-like eyes blinking with an innocent, harmless warmth. Yet, the moment dinner ended and Derek stepped out of the kitchen, there it was. Her bedroom door was left half ajar. She stood with her back to the hallway, slowly changing into a silk slip, letting one delicate lace strap slide slowly down her shoulder. As I watched the reflection of her face through the crack in the door, I caught the unmistakable, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. In that split second, the truth crystallized. Her weaponized incompetence was a performance staged entirely for my benefit. Fortunately for me, my boyfriend had a zero-tolerance policy for stupid games. "Oh. I am so sorry. I completely forgot we had company tonight." Chloe spun around, her hands clutching the slipping silk strap to her chest. She looked up at Derek, her eyes wide and watery, her shoulders trembling slightly like a frightened rabbit. It was a routine she had perfected over the years. Play the innocent, act vulnerable, and disguise blatant boundary crossing as mere scatterbrain charm. With either of my exes, this would have triggered a stammered apology, a lingering gaze, or an awkward attempt to look away. "Does your family keep an exhibitionist as a pet?" Derek asked, his stride never faltering. He didn't spare her a single glance. Instead, he reached out, grabbed her door handle, and slammed the door shut. Bang! The heavy thud vibrated through the narrow hallway, shaking a faint dusting of plaster from the crown molding. The air in the corridor froze. From behind the closed door came a sharp, startled gasp, followed by the soft, theatrical whimpering of my sister. "What on earth is going on out here?" My mother, Helen, rushed out of the master bedroom, still clutching a half-folded sweater, her apron strings fluttering. My father, Robert, poked his head out from the balcony. Derek reached for a wet wipe from the dispenser on the entryway console, slowly and methodically cleaning his fingers. "Nothing," he said, his voice dropping to a freezing temperature as he tossed the wipe into the trash can. "Just doing your daughter a favor and blocking the draft." Stripping with the door wide open in the dead of winter, I was worried the lack of blood flow to her head would cause hypothermia. Just then, Chloe pulled the door open, wrapped in an oversized plush robe. Her eyes were red, brimming with tears that threatened to spill over her perfectly made-up cheeks. "Derek, did you have to slam the door so hard?" she murmured, her voice laced with a delicate, trembling sweetness. "You scared me half to death. I just have a terrible memory. I forgot we had a guest. Please don't be angry with me." As she spoke, she shrunk back slightly behind me, shrinking into herself like a wounded bird. Helen immediately rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her. "Oh, sweetheart, it's okay. You know how forgetful you are," Helen cooed before snapping her head toward me. "And Bridget, honestly. You know how scatterbrained your sister is. If you're bringing a man home, the least you could do is check her room first to make sure she's decent." The first wave of moral blackmail, delivered with practiced precision. I looked at my mother's face, so utterly convinced of her own righteousness. It was always my fault. Chloe was the fragile, innocent one who was allowed to make mistakes. And I, as the sensible younger sister, was expected to anticipate her blunders, clean up her messes, and bear the consequences. "Mom, I told her to lock her door 3 separate times before we walked in," I said, my voice entirely flat. Chloe's tears finally spilled over. "Bridget, I'm so sorry. I really didn't do it on purpose. I was just thinking about something else, and I got distracted." She looked up at Derek, her gaze wet and pleading. "Derek, please don't blame Bridget. It's all my fault. I'm just so stupid." It was textbook manipulation. Admit fault first, display extreme vulnerability, and then protectively plead on my behalf to make herself look saintly while highlighting my coldness. Both of my previous relationships had withered under this exact sequence. I turned my head to look at Derek. I wanted to see if those clear, discerning eyes of his could see through the stale, toxic theater. Derek looked down at her. His face remained entirely expressionless, as though he were watching a particularly dull, low-budget comedy. "Well, you've got one thing right. You are incredibly stupid," Derek said, His voice wasn't loud, but every word cut through the room like a scalpel. Chloe froze. Helen stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Neither of them had ever encountered someone who took the cute, dumb girl routine and used it to step directly on her face. Knowing there is an adult male guest in the house and still failing to close a door while undressing isn't being scatterbrained, Derek continued, keeping his hands in his coat pockets as he looked down at her. It's a failure of basic life skills. And looking at your robe, the stitching is coming undone. Since your budget seems to be as low as your IQ, I highly suggest you learn to lock your door, lest people mistake your carelessness for a cheap solicitation. The silence in the hallway became absolute. Chloe's carefully applied, no makeup look turned ashen. She stood paralyzed, her tears drying instantly on her cheeks. How dare you speak to my daughter like that? Robert boomed, storming over from the balcony and pointing an angry finger at Derek's chest. This is my house. My daughter can wear whatever she wants in her own home. You're a guest here. Who gave you the right to look at her and then insult her? Let's clear a few things up, Derek replied, meeting out Robert's gaze without flinching. First, I didn't look. Flat chests don't appeal to my taste. Second, she left the door wide open, and the hallway is shared space. If you think raising a daughter to strip in full view of common areas is a sign of good parenting, I'll reserve judgment on your family values. He turned back to me, his tone instantly softening. Bridget, where's your coat? I picked up my heavy wool coat from the sofa, and Derek gently draped it over my shoulders, smoothing down my collar. Let's go. The air in here is making me nauseous. I looked at my parents' livid faces, and then at Chloe, who looked as if she were about to collapse. Instead of the panic I expected to feel, a strange, intoxicating sense of relief washed over me. Okay, I said. I zipped up my coat and followed him toward the door. Behind us, Helen was shaking with rage. Bridget. If you walk out that door with him tonight, don't you dare call me your mother ever again. I stopped at the threshold. I didn't turn around. Fine by me. Derek pulled the heavy front door open, letting a gust of crisp, freezing winter air sweep into the stifling apartment. Bridget, Mom is just speaking out of anger, you know how she is. Chloe cried out from the hallway, her voice finally losing its soft, breathy cadence, replaced by an edge of sheer desperation. Derek let out a low, dry chuckle as we stepped into the corridor. Did you hear that? He murmured, looking down at me. Even the dumb ones bite when you take away their stage. You have a remarkably mean streak, I said as I buckled my seatbelt. Derek started the engine, his long fingers resting casually on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. Mean? I call it being a realist. If she were truly as brainless as she claims, she wouldn't have understood my insults well enough to get angry. She would have smiled and thanked me for the feedback. He turned the wheel, navigating the car out of my parents' neighborhood. That little routine of hers? The interns at my firm have better manipulation tactics on day one. I looked out the window as the streetlights blurred past. The heavy stone that had rested on my chest for over 20 years felt as though it had finally been cracked open, letting in a breath of fresh air. Since childhood, Chloe had been the sun around which our entire household revolved. When she ruined my school projects, Helen would say, "Your sister is just clumsy, Bridget. Can't you just do it over?" When she took the dresses I bought with my own money, Robert would say, "She loves fashion, and she looks so beautiful in them. Just let her have them." Even when it came to my personal life, all Chloe had to do was put on her wide-eyed, fragile act and shed a few tears in front of my boyfriends, and suddenly, they would view her as a delicate flower and me as a bitter, jealous shrew. No one had ever stripped away her armor the way Derek just did. My phone began to buzz incessantly in my purse. I pulled it out. It was a barrage of voice texts from my mother. The red notification dots looked like fresh drops of blood on the screen. I tapped the first one, letting the audio play. Bridget. You think you're so clever, don't you? Bringing some classless, disrespectful man into our home to humiliate your sister. Chloe has never had a harsh word said to her in her entire life, and now she's sobbed herself to sleep because of him. I listened, my face entirely blank. I tapped the second one. You tell that Derek character to come back here and apologize to your sister right now, or you are no longer welcome in this family. We clothed you and fed you, and this is how you repay us? Ganging up with an outsider to bully your own flesh and blood? Derek heard every word clearly over the car's quiet cabin. He let out a dark, mocking laugh. Does your mother get her scripts from bad 90s daytime television? I locked my phone and tossed it back into my purse. I'm used to it. Being used to it doesn't make it acceptable. Derek brought the car to a halt at a red light and turned to look at me, his eyes dark and fiercely protective. Are you planning on taking this forever? I stared back into his deep, clear eyes. No, I said. Not anymore. I want everything she's ever taken from me back. With interest. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Derek's face. Let me know when you're ready to make your move. There is nothing I enjoy more than watching a fraud fall apart. The following afternoon, I was in the middle of a marketing strategy meeting when Zoe, our receptionist, sent me a quick message on Slack. Bridget, your sister is downstairs at the front desk. She says she needs to see you. I frowned. Chloe rarely, if ever, came to my office. She detested the fast-paced, high-stress atmosphere of my tech firm. She always said it lacked the curated aesthetic of her social media life. I excused myself from the conference room and walked out to the lobby. Chloe was standing near the glass doors, looking impeccably styled in a cropped boucle jacket, holding a sleek insulated food container. The moment she saw me, her face lit up with a soft, fragile smile. "Bridget, are you busy?" Her voice was as gentle as ever, showing no trace of the humiliation from the night before. "What are you doing here, Chloe?" I didn't reach for the container she was holding out. Undeterred by my coldness, she set the container gently on the reception counter. Mom was so upset last night she couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about it, and I realized it was my carelessness that caused the whole misunderstanding. I'm sure Derek just got the wrong impression of me. She lowered her head slightly, exposing the delicate line of her neck. "I made some fresh chicken soup. I thought you could give it to him at his office. As a peace offering." A few colleagues walking past paused, glancing over at us. To any outsider, she looked like the picture of a devoted, loving older sister trying to mend a family rift caused by an ungrateful younger sibling. Looking at her performance, a wave of profound disgust rose in my throat. "No, thank you," I said. "He doesn't eat things from untrustworthy sources." Chloe's eyes welled with tears right on cue. "Bridget, are you still angry with me? I know Derek is incredibly successful, and I know you're worried I'll try to take him from you. But I swear, I would never do that." Her voice was just loud enough to carry across the lobby, reaching the ears of the receptionist and a few lingering coworkers. It was a preemptive strike. By framing my anger as jealousy over her stealing my boyfriend, she ensured that whatever I said next would look like bitter insecurity. In the past, I would have dragged her out of the lobby to avoid a scene, swallowing my pride just to make her stop. But not today. I calmly pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened the voice recorder app, and placed the device face up on the marble counter between us. "Go on," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "Tell me more about how you plan on stealing him." "I'm listening." The sweet, fragile expression on Chloe's face shattered instantly. She clearly hadn't expected me to strip away her deniability so ruthlessly, let alone display the recording screen right in front of her. "Bridget, what are you doing?" Her voice trembled, her eyes darting nervously toward the glowing screen of my phone. "Since you love performing for an audience so much, I figured we should get a high-quality recording of the show," I said, leaning back against the reception desk and crossing my arms. "You just said I'm terrified you'll steal him. So, tell me, how exactly do you plan on doing that? With your cheap, unraveled house robes, or with the soup?" A couple of my coworkers nearby let out muffled snickers. People in tech didn't lack the intuition to spot a toxic family dynamic when it was laid bare. Chloe's face flushed a deep, angry crimson as she realized she was the one being ridiculed. "Bridget, you are being ridiculous," she snapped, dropping her sweet tone entirely as her tears vanished. "I came here to do something nice for you, and you're trying to intimidate me with a recording?" She lunged to grab my phone. I swiped it off the counter before her manicured nails could touch it. "Why'd you stop crying?" I asked, my voice cold. Where did the fragile, innocent act go? Done performing? Chloe ground her teeth, her chest heaving with suppressed fury. But with so many eyes on her, she couldn't let herself fully scream. Instead, she stepped closer, leaning in until her breath brushed my ear, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper that only the two of us could hear. "You think you're so smart, Bridget? You think that man is going to protect you forever? Growing up, if I wanted something, Mom and Dad gave it to me. Every single time." She sneered, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Your last two boyfriends? I barely had to snap my fingers before they were crawling after me like dogs. You think Derek is any different? Men are all the same. Just wait. I'll have him begging to crawl at my feet." She assumed I had stopped the recording. She assumed that whispering meant she was safe. What she didn't know was that my phone was a top-tier model with highly sensitive directional microphones. And she certainly didn't realize that while the screen had gone dark to save battery, the recording app was still running in the background. I looked at her face, slightly distorted by raw envy and a pathological need to win. For the first time, I felt nothing but pity for her. "I'll be waiting," I said softly, taking a step back to re-establish my personal space. Chloe let out a harsh, bitter laugh, grabbed her food container off the counter, and turned on her designer heels, stomping out of the lobby. I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and saved the 3-minute and 12-second file. My first trump card was secured. When Derek picked me up after work that evening, he took one look at my face and handed me a hot latte. "You look exhausted. Did your sister show up to play her little games again?" I took a sip of the warm coffee, letting the tension settle in my chest. "She came to the office to deliver apology soup and issue a formal declaration of war." I pulled out my phone and played the audio file. Chloe's sharp, venomous whisper filled the quiet cabin of the car. "I'll have him begging to crawl at my feet." Derek listened, his handsome face twisting into a look of profound distaste. "Does she have any sense of hygiene? That sounds like a quick way to contract a fungal infection." Pass. A laugh burst from my throat, the tension that had gathered in my shoulders all day dissolving instantly. "You're not angry?" I asked. "Why would I be angry?" Being targeted by an idiot only proves I have decent market value. Derek shifted the car into drive. But a parasite like that will keep buzzing around you forever unless you crush it completely. He tapped his fingers rhythmically against the steering wheel. When do you want to pull the net? New Year's Eve, I said, looking out at the glittering city lights. Our entire extended family will be at my parents' house for dinner. Chloe's entire identity is built on being the perfect, sweet golden child in front of the relatives. I want to strip her of that identity in front of everyone she cares about. Derek glanced at me, his eyes shining with unvarnished admiration. Brilliant, he murmured. Do you need any technical support? I could easily arrange for that audio to play on your parents' smart TV during dinner. No, I shook my head. This recording is just the beginning. I need more than just her words. I need irrefutable proof that she isn't just targeting me, but that she's a pathological liar. Over the next 2 weeks, Chloe was uncharacteristically quiet. She didn't post any passive-aggressive updates on Instagram, she didn't send any toxic messages, and she stayed entirely out of my way. My mother called me twice, her tone cold and commanding, informing me that I was required to attend the family New Year's Eve dinner, but that Derek was absolutely forbidden from coming. That man has no manners, and I will not have him ruining our holiday, she barked. I agreed to come alone. Because I knew this silence was just the eye of the storm. A woman like Chloe would never let a slight go unavenged. She was planning something big. The afternoon before New Year's Eve, Helen ordered me to come over early to help prepare the house. It was her usual power play, treating me like hired help to re-establish her authority. I had just finished washing my hands in the kitchen when a sharp, shattering crash echoed from the living room, followed by Chloe's theatrical gasp. Oh my gosh. No. How did this happen? I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked into the living room. Scattered across the hardwood floor were dozens of delicate green and white ceramic shards. It was my gift for Derek's grandmother, an authentic Qing Dynasty Celadon tea bowl with a delicate crackle glaze. I had spent half of my monthly salary and pulled several favors with an antique dealer friend to secure it. Now, it was nothing but a pile of worthless dust. Chloe stood beside the coffee table, holding the empty silk-lined box, her face a mask of horror and distress. Bridget, I am so sorry. I didn't know this was something valuable. I was just trying to help clear off the coffee table, and it just slipped out of my hands. She pressed a hand over her mouth, tears instantly pooling in her eyes. Hearing the commotion, Helen rushed out of the kitchen. She took one look at the shattered porcelain, then at Chloe's weeping form, and immediately pieced together her own version of reality. She didn't say a single word of reprimand to Chloe. Instead, she spun on me, her brow furrowing with anger. Why would you leave something so expensive lying around where anyone could knock it over? You know how clumsy your sister is. Now look what you've done. Who are you going to blame for this? The same old script. The same twisted logic. I didn't argue. I simply stood there, silently staring at the broken shards on the floor. It was the exact style of Celadon Derek's grandmother collected. I had planned to present it to her on New Year's Day. Bridget, how much was it? Let me pay you back, Chloe said, stepping forward to gently grasp my sleeve. Please don't be mad at me. I'll use my savings to buy you another one. Pay me back. With what? I pulled my arm away, my voice icy. It was an antique. Even if you had the money, you couldn't find another one like it. It's just a damn cup. Robert barked, stepping out of his study, unable to tolerate me putting pressure on his favorite daughter. Bridget, drop the attitude. Your sister apologized. What more do you want from her? Dragging down the holiday spirit over a piece of clay, do you have to be so petty? Petty. That was the word they had thrown at me my entire life. Because I was the sensible one, the smart one, the one who could handle things. Therefore, I was expected to have infinite patience for Chloe's destructive carelessness. I'm not being petty, I said quietly. I knelt down and began picking up the sharp ceramic pieces one by one, dropping them into a plastic bag. But this belonged to Derek. Since you all think it's so unimportant, you can explain the loss to him yourselves. At the mention of Derek's name, a fleeting glint of satisfaction flashed in Chloe's eyes. She thought she had won. Without the gift, she assumed I would be too embarrassed to visit Derek's family, and that Derek would grow cold toward me for my apparent lack of respect. That was her play. But she had miscalculated one crucial detail. I tied the trash bag with a tight double knot. Mom, what time are Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Thomas arriving tomorrow? Helen blinked, caught off guard by my sudden shift in tone. They'll be here by noon. Why? Are you planning on ruining dinner with your sour face? I offered her a polite, cold smile. Not at all. In fact, I'm going to make sure tomorrow is a holiday none of us will ever forget. New Year's Eve, 11 a.m. The house was filled with the chatter of our extended family. Uncle Thomas, Aunt Beatrice, and a handful of cousins had arrived, filling the living room with holiday cheer and gossip. Chloe, dressed in a stunning red knit dress and flawless makeup, flitted from guest to guest like a social butterfly. Aunt Beatrice, you look absolutely radiant. Is that coat new? It suits you beautifully. Uncle Thomas, I bought these sugar-free roasted pecans specifically for you. The relatives were practically glowing under her attention. Chloe is just such a darling girl. Whoever ends up marrying her will be the luckiest man in the world, Aunt Beatrice said with a warm smile. Exactly, Uncle Thomas agreed, before turning his gaze to where I sat quietly in the corner, sipping my tea. Unlike Bridget over there. Always so serious, even as a little girl. Bridget, why isn't your wealthy boyfriend here today? I thought you were bringing him. The spotlight had finally found me. Chloe's eyes lit up. She quickly dropped her smile, replacing it with a look of deep, practiced concern. Aunt Beatrice, please don't bring him up, Chloe sighed, sitting down on the sofa next to her. The man, he has a very difficult temper. When he came over last time, he was incredibly rude to us. He even yelled at me. Bridget has changed so much since she started dating him, she won't even listen to Mom and Dad anymore. The room fell into a stunned silence. Is that true? Uncle Thomas looked at my father, who offered a grim, silent nod of confirmation. Bridget, I have to speak frankly, Uncle Thomas said, adopting his most paternal, lecturing tone. A man's character is everything. If he doesn't respect your family, and if he treats your sweet sister like that, you need to break it off immediately. He's right, Aunt Beatrice added. Chloe is the gentlest soul. If a man can treat her with such hostility, he probably has control issues. Don't let his money blind you, Bridget. Within minutes, the living room had transformed into an intervention, with me as the target. Helen sat on the armchair, a small, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She clearly enjoyed watching the family pressure me into submission. I set my teacup down on the saucer with a soft click. Mom. Dad. I looked at them both. You've always insisted that Chloe is just a harmless, scatterbrained girl who doesn't know any better. I pulled the sleek black voice recorder from my coat pocket and held it up for everyone to see. Since everyone here is so convinced of her innocence, why don't we listen to what she sounds like when she thinks no one is listening? The silence in the living room was not merely quiet, it had the cold, calcified weight of a tomb. Aunt Beatrice's teacup remained suspended halfway between her saucer and her lips, the delicate bone china trembling ever so slightly in her manicured fingers. Uncle Thomas, who had spent the last 20 minutes puffing out his chest and preparing to deliver a sermon on filial piety and the sacred virtue of family harmony, sat frozen, his heavy jowls slackening into an expression of bewildered disbelief. On the mahogany coffee table, the small, polished obsidian cylinder of the digital voice recorder sat like an unexploded ordnance. The screen blinked, a steady crimson pulse marking each passing second of playback. You think you're so smart, Bridget? Chloe's voice drifted from the speaker. Stripped clean of every breathy, honeyed modulation she had weaponized since childhood. In its place was a flat, venomous sneer that sounded like metal scraping against dry stone. You think that man is going to protect you forever? Growing up, if I wanted something, Mom and Dad gave it to me. Every single time. A sharp intake of breath hissed from across the sofa. Chloe stood by the marble mantelpiece. The festive, crimson knit dress that had made her look like a porcelain angel only 5 minutes ago now seemed to cling to her like a shroud. The rosy blush on her cheeks had bled away entirely, leaving behind a dull, chalky gray. The recording rolled onward, relentlessly crisp, capturing every wet, spiteful syllable. Your last 2 boyfriends? I barely had to snap my fingers before they were crawling after me like dogs. You think Derek is any different? Men are all the same. Just wait. I'll have him begging to crawl at my feet. Click. The audio ended with the faint rustle of a coat and the distant clatter of my office lobby. I did not move. I did not raise my voice, nor did I smirk. I simply reached out, picked up the recorder, and let my thumb graze the smooth aluminum casing before sliding it back into my blazer pocket. Aunt Beatrice, I said, my voice cutting through the suffocating stillness like a clean scalpel. Uncle Thomas. You were saying something about character? About Derek's difficult temper, and how my sister's gentle soul was so terribly wounded by our lack of family values? Uncle Thomas cleared his throat, a guttural, nervous sound. He looked at Chloe. Then at my parents, his eyes darting frantically as though searching for an exit from an ambush he hadn't realized he had walked into. Well, now, hold on, Thomas stammered, shifting his weight on the leather cushion. That didn't sound like Chloe at all. Is this some kind of digital manipulation? You work in tech, Bridget. People can fake voices with computer programs nowadays, can't they? A pathetic lifeline, thrown by a man desperate to salvage his own authority. Helen seized it instantly. Yes. Exactly. My mother sprang from her armchair, her hands fluttering in frantic, theatrical agitation. Her face was mottled with red splotches of indignation. Thomas is right. Bridget, how low can you sink? You bring a fake recording into this house on New Year's Eve to slander your own sister? Just Because Derek was caught treating Chloe like garbage, you create this monstrous lie to cover for him? She lunged forward, reaching across the table to grab my arm, her manicured nails hooking toward my wrist. Hand that thing over right now. Delete it. You've gone completely insane. I stepped back neatly, letting her fingers swipe empty air. It's not fake, Mom, I said calmly. And if you'd like, I can forward the original, uncompressed WAV file with full metadata, timestamp, and geotagging directly to every single member of this extended family, right alongside the building's lobby security footage that shows Chloe leaning into my ear at precisely 2:14 p.m. last Thursday. Chloe's knees visibly buckled. She reached out a trembling hand, steadying herself against the edge of the fireplace mantel, nearly knocking over a silver-framed portrait of herself winning a high school pageant. Bridget, why are you doing this to me? Chloe choked out, her signature tears instantly springing to her eyes. She dropped her head, her shoulders heaving in rhythmic, pitiful spasms. I was angry. You were being so cold to me at your office. You humiliated me in front of your coworkers when I only brought you soup. I said those things out of spite because you broke my heart. I didn't mean them. She turned toward Uncle Thomas, her lower lip quivering with masterful precision. Uncle Thomas, you know me. I'm clumsy, I speak without thinking when I'm hurt. I was just lashing out because Bridget made me feel so worthless. I would never actually do something like that. Derek is Bridget's boyfriend. I want her to be happy. I've always wanted her to be happy. Helen immediately moved to wrap her arms around Chloe's shoulders, glaring at me over her golden child's trembling head like an enraged hen protecting a chick. You see? Helen snapped, her voice shrill and trembling with self-righteous fury. She was hurt. You pushed her to the brink, Bridget, and now you're twisting her words. What kind of monster records her own sister during a private moment of grief? A sister who has had two entire relationships systematically dismantled by the exact same, clumsy routine, I replied, holding my mother's furious gaze. Without blinking. That's enough. Robert's voice boomed from the doorway of his study. He stepped into the room, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. He didn't look at Chloe, and he didn't look at the recording device. His anger, as it had been for 24 years, was directed entirely at the disruption of his household peace, which meant it was directed entirely at me. This is New Year's Eve, Robert said, pointing a thick finger at my face. We are not airing your petty, childish jealousies in front of our guests. You have embarrassed this family enough for one day. Put that thing away, apologize to your sister for setting a trap for her, and go help your mother in the kitchen. The room seemed to exhale collectively. The patriarch had spoken. The hierarchy was attempting to reassert itself. Aunt Beatrice smoothed down her skirt, looking uncomfortable, while Uncle Thomas took a long, relieved sip of his lukewarm tea. They truly believed that was the end of it. They believed that 20 years of conditioned obedience would force me to lower my head, swallow the poison, and play the role of the bitter, jealous daughter once more. I looked at my father. I looked at the graying hair at his temples, the smug certainty in the set of his mouth, and the complete, unyielding lack of respect in his eyes. No, I said. Robert blinked, stunned. What did you say? I said no, I repeated, my voice steady, clear, and ringing through the living room. I will not apologize. I will not go into the kitchen. And we are not done. Bridget. Helen shrieked. How dare you speak to your father like that? Because there is one more matter that needs to be settled before dinner, I interrupted, cutting her off with a sharpness that made even Aunt Beatrice flinch. I walked over to the side console where my handbag sat. I pulled out a heavy, transparent zip-top bag filled with the jagged, pale green ceramic shards of the antique celadone bowl Chloe had shattered the afternoon before, and set it squarely in the center of the coffee table. Chloe's weeping stopped instantly. A flicker of raw, sharp panic darted across her eyes before she quickly masked it with another layer of sorrow. Yesterday, I said, turning to address the entire room, Chloe accidentally knocked this off the coffee table. My mother immediately screamed at me for leaving expensive items in the open. My father told me it was just a piece of clay and called me petty for being upset. I looked directly at Chloe. Chloe told me she was just trying to clean up, that her hands slipped, and that she would gladly pay for it out of her savings. Isn't that right, Chloe? Chloe sniffled, pressing a lace handkerchief to her nose. I did, and I meant it. I'll give you whatever money I have, Bridget. I told you it was an accident. You told me it was an accident, I echoed. Just like you told everyone you Didn't know Derek was in the hallway when you stripped down to your lingerie. Just like you told everyone you forgot we had company. I reached back into my bag and pulled out a sleek, white portable projector and an iPad. Bridget, what is the meaning of this? Robert barked, taking a step toward me. Put that garbage away right now. Sit down, Dad, I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a cold authority. That actually made him pause mid-stride. Unless you want me to send what I'm about to project directly to the board of your country club and every partner at your accounting firm. Robert froze. His face went entirely purple. You wouldn't dare. Try me. I tapped the screen of the iPad. The portable projector whirred to life, casting a bright, high-definition beam of light against the large, blank white wall. Above the fireplace, directly above Chloe's pageant portrait. What is that? Aunt Beatrice murmured, leaning forward, her curiosity finally overpowering her loyalty to my mother. That, I said, is the feed from the discreet 4K pet monitoring camera I installed inside the bookshelf speaker last month, because Mom complained that the neighbor's cat kept sneaking onto the balcony. Chloe's entire body went rigid. The handkerchief fell from her fingers, fluttering silently to the rug. The video on the wall began to play. The timestamp in the lower corner read, yesterday, 3:42 and 18 seconds p.m. The living room on the screen was quiet. In the background, the faint sound of running water could be heard from the kitchen, me washing my hands. On the screen, Chloe entered the frame. There were no tears on her face. There was no doe-eyed, innocent confusion. Her posture was completely straight, her expression chillingly cold and calculating. She walked over to the coffee table where the silk-lined presentation box sat. Open. She looked toward the kitchen door, paused, and listened. Then, she looked directly at the antique celadone bowl. She didn't bump the table. She didn't trip over the rug. She didn't fumble while trying to dust the mahogany surface. With slow, deliberate movements, Chloe picked up the celadone bowl with both hands. She turned it over, examining the delicate crackle glaze beneath the room's chandelier. A cold, smug smile touched her lips, the exact same triumphant smirk I had caught through the crack of her bedroom door on Christmas. She held the bowl out at shoulder height, directly over the bare hardwood floor. Then, she opened her fingers. Smash. The audio from the camera caught the violent, ringing explosion of porcelain against wood. Immediately after dropping it, Chloe took 2 steps backward, kicked a stray shard beneath the armchair to make the spread look wider, threw her hands over her mouth, and let out that practiced, terrified wail, oh my gosh. No. How did this happen? The video paused on Chloe's face, contorted into an exaggerated mask of fake horror, her eyes already dryly searching the kitchen doorway for my mother's arrival. The living room fell into a silence so profound you could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Aunt Beatrice's mouth had dropped completely open. Her husband, Uncle Thomas, stared at the frozen projection on the wall, his face turning a deep, embarrassed shade of crimson. The cousins seated near the back of the room were exchanging wide-eyed, frantic glances, 2 of them subtly pulling out their phones beneath the table. You. Aunt Beatrice whispered, looking at Chloe as if she were seeing a complete stranger. You stood there and dropped it on purpose. You smiled. Chloe began to hyperventilate. Her eyes darted from the screen to our parents. Then to Aunt Beatrice, her breathing shallow and ragged. No, that's taken out of context. Chloe shrieked, her voice finally losing every shred of its cultivated softness, cracking into a sharp, grating panic. I was looking at it. It felt greasy in my hands. I slipped. You held it for 8 seconds, Chloe, I said, shutting off the projector with a flick of my finger. The room plunged back into normal lighting, leaving Chloe exposed beneath the harsh glare of the chandelier. You checked the kitchen door twice to make sure I was occupied. And then you dropped it from 5 feet in the air. Why? Uncle Thomas asked, his paternal facade completely crumbling into genuine disgust. Why on earth would you do something so malicious to your own sister? Because she thought it was my gift to Derek's grandmother, a deep, resonant voice answered from the entryway. Everyone spun around. Standing in the arched doorway of the foyer was Derek. He wore a tailored charcoal wool overcoat over an impeccably fitted dark navy suit. His posture was effortless, his expression one of icy, lethal amusement. In his hands, he held a sleek, ribbon-tied lacquer box. Derek? Helen gasped, clutching her chest. How did you get in here? Robert. Did you leave the door unlocked? The front door was unlocked, Derek said smoothly, stepping into the living room with the measured stride of a man walking into a boardroom he already owned. Though given this family's casual disregard for closed doors, I assumed an open door policy was standard operating procedure. He stopped beside my chair, resting a warm, steady hand on my shoulder. The tension that had coiled in my spine over the last hour seemed to ease instantly. At his touch. You weren't invited. Robert yelled, his face purple, using anger to mask the absolute humiliation crushing his household. Get out of my house. I'll leave shortly, Mr. Vance, Derek replied, not sparing Robert more than a passing glance. Just as soon as I deliver two things. First, an invoice. Second, a reality check. Derek set the lacquer box down gently on the side table, then reached into his breast pocket and drew out a folded document, tossing it lightly onto the coffee table right next to the bag of shattered ceramic. That bowl your daughter so gleefully obliterated wasn't a standard gift, Derek said, his sharp eyes locking onto Chloe, who looked as if she were trying to physically dissolve into the wallpaper. It was a catalogued piece from the Southern Song Dynasty, a Longquan Celadon tea bowl, on loan from my family's private trust to be authenticated and mounted by Bridget specialist for my grandmother's 80th birthday. Helen let out a breathy, dismissive scoff, though her voice lacked any real conviction. Don't be ridiculous. Song Dynasty? It's just an old dish Bridget bought with her salary. The appraisal and provenance documents are right in front of you, Mrs. Vance. Derek said coldly. Assessed value, $45,000. Since it was destroyed intentionally on private property, my family's legal counsel has already drafted the preliminary filing for willful destruction of property and grand larceny. The word 45,000 detonated in the room like a bomb. Uncle Thomas practically choked on his own breath. Aunt Beatrice pulled her hand away from Chloe as though the girl were coated in toxic waste. 45,000? Robert whispered, his voice cracking, all the bluster draining out of him in an instant. He looked down at the paper on the table, his hands trembling as he picked up the appraisal certificate bearing the official seal of a renowned heritage foundation. Bridget, you wouldn't do this to your own family. You can't sue your sister for $45,000. I'm not suing her, I said evenly. Derek's family trust is. Bridget, please. Chloe fell to her knees on the rug, crawling toward my chair, completely abandoning the poised socialite act. Her makeup was smeared, black. Streaks of mascara cutting through her foundation. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was worth that much. I thought it was just a few $100s. I was just jealous, Bridget. You always get the smart men, you always get the good jobs, and everyone expects me to just be pretty and dumb. I hated that you had something so nice. The truth, raw and ugly, finally spilled out of her mouth. The relatives sat in stunned, horrified silence. There was no more clumsy Chloe. There was no more scatterbrained innocent. There was only an insecure, deeply malicious 26-year-old woman who had spent her entire life destroying anything her sister possessed out of sheer, unadulterated spite. Helen rushed over, trying to pull Chloe up, her own face pale with dread. Derek. Mr. Sterling, please, Helen begged, her voice dropping into a desperate, groveling register she had never once used with anyone in her life. Chloe made a terrible mistake. She's young, she's foolish. We can work this out. Privately. We're going to be family soon, aren't we? Bridget, tell him. You can't let them ruin your sister's life over a misunderstanding. Derek looked down at Helen with an expression of such clinical detachment it was more devastating than a slap. We are not going to be family, Mrs. Vance, Derek said coldly. Because after tonight, Bridget is cutting every legal, financial, and personal tie with this toxic cesspool you call a household. And if you think this bowl is the only thing your daughter owes, you haven't been paying attention to her bank accounts. Derek tapped the screen of his phone, turning it toward Robert. Over the past 3 years, Derek said, his voice level and methodical, Chloe has maintained her lifestyle influencer image by opening 4 separate credit lines using Bridget's social security number and forged signatures, credit lines that were only discovered when Bridget applied for our joint mortgage pre-approval 2 weeks ago. The air in the room was sucked out completely. I stood up, pulling a thick folder from my briefcase and placing it heavily on the table. I wondered why my credit score dipped 6 months ago, I said, looking at my father. I pulled the full forensic audit. $32,000 across 3 cards. Designer handbags, luxury hotel stays, weekend trips to Napa with her friends. All billed to secondary cards opened in my name, with the billing address routed to Mom and Dad's P.O. box. I turned to my mother. You knew, didn't you? Helen's eyes darted away. She couldn't look at me. Her silence was a deafening confession. You knew, I whispered, feeling the final, lingering thread of childhood attachment snap cleanly inside my chest. When the collection notices came to the box, you paid the minimums out of Dad's account and hid them, because you couldn't bear to let your precious Chloe face the consequences of identity fraud. She was building her career. Helen cried out, cornered and desperate. She needed to look successful to get brand sponsorships. You have a high-paying corporate job, Bridget. You could afford to absorb a little debt for your sister. Why are you so selfish? Selfish? The word echoed in the room, hollow and absurd. Aunt Beatrice stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Helen, you have completely lost your mind, Beatrice said, her voice shaking with disgust. You let this girl steal her sister's identity? You let her break thousands of dollars of antiques out of pure spite, and then you sit here and call Bridget selfish? Beatrice, you don't understand, Helen started, reaching out. Do not touch me, Aunt Beatrice snapped, stepping backward. Thomas, get the coats. We are leaving. Wait, Thomas, Beatrice, please, it's New Year's Eve. Robert pleaded, his hands outstretched, looking entirely broken as the social standing he had spent 30 years cultivating evaporated in a matter of minutes. We can explain. It's a family misunderstanding. There's nothing to explain, Robert, Uncle Thomas said, his face stony as he pulled his heavy coat from the hall closet. I've sat in this house for 10 years listening to you brag about Chloe while treating Bridget like an unpaid servant. Turns out your golden child is a thief and a fraud, and you two are her enablers. I wouldn't lend you a single dime to pay off these lawsuits, and I will certainly be having a long conversation with the family trust executors about your management of grandmother's estate. Within 5 minutes, the living room had emptied. The cousins left without saying a word, averting their eyes in deep embarrassment. Aunt Beatrice didn't even look back as she slammed the front door shut, the heavy thud rattling the entryway console. The silence that returned to the house was completely different now. It was the silence of total devastation. Chloe sat crumpled on the floor, weeping violently, her hands clutching her knees. Robert stood by the fireplace, staring blankly at the wall, his shoulders slumped as if the entire weight of his approaching retirement had just collapsed upon his chest. Helen sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at the thick legal documents on the table, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Here's how this is going to work, I said, stepping into the center of the room. My voice was calm, devoid of any rage, bitterness, or hatred. It was the voice of a creditor settling an account. First, Chloe will sign the legal confession of fraudulent credit acquisition, drafted by Derek's attorneys tonight. The $32,000 in debt will be transferred entirely into her name, along with the accrued interest. If she refuses, the formal police report for felony identity theft is filed on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Chloe let out a strangled sob, but she didn't dare argue. Second, I continued, looking at my parents, you will sell Chloe's car, the one you bought her with my college refund check 3 years ago, to pay the initial retainer for Derek's family trust settlement regarding the antique. Derek has agreed to accept a structured restitution plan over 5 years, provided you sign a binding promissory note secured against this house. Robert's head snapped up. A lien on the house? Bridget, that's our retirement. Then let Chloe go to prison for grand larceny, Derek said, his voice smooth and remorseless. A state penitentiary provides free room and board. It will save you quite a bit on her wardrobe. Robert's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at Chloe, then at Helen, and finally dropped his head into his hands, letting out a long, defeated groan. And third, I said, picking up my coat from the back of the chair, you will never call me again. You will not call me for holiday dinners. You will not call me when Chloe's credit cards max out. You will not call me when you realize that the daughter you worshipped is entirely incapable of taking care of you in your old age. I slid my arms into my coat, feeling the warm, heavy wool settle over my shoulders. Bridget. Helen looked up, tears finally streaming down her aged, hollow cheeks. You're my daughter, how can you be so cruel? We raised you. You raised me to be your scapegoat, I said, looking her dead in the eye. And you raised Chloe to be a monster. Enjoy each other's company. I turned to Derek. Let's go. Derek picked up the lacquer box from the side table. As we reached the front door, he paused, turned back toward the living room, and looked at Chloe, who was still trembling on the floor. By the way, Derek said casually, lifting the lid of the lacquer box to reveal an exquisite, unbroken Celadon tea bowl resting safely within the silk padding. Bridget is far too smart to leave an authentic Song Dynasty artifact on a coffee table in a house inhabited by toddlers. The one you smashed was a $30 plaster replica we ordered from an art student on Tuesday. He let the lid snap shut with a crisp, sharp click. The $45,000 lawsuit, however, was very real. Consider it the price of tuition for learning that stupidity isn't a strategy, it's just a liability. The winter night was biting, crisp, and clean. The streetlights bathed the suburban avenue in a quiet, amber glow. Snow had begun to fall, tiny white crystals drifting lazily through the frozen air, melting against the warm windshield of Derek's car. As Derek pulled out of the driveway, I looked in the side mirror. The warm lights of my parents' house were still on, but through the large front window, I could see the silhouette of my mother screaming at my father, and Chloe standing between them, waving her arms in frantic, hysterical protest. The theater was still running, but the audience had left. I leaned my head back against the leather seat, closing my eyes. How do you feel? Derek asked softly, his hand reaching across the center console to lace his fingers through mine. His grip was warm, strong, and real. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 26 years, the suffocating phantom pressure on my chest was gone. The air entered my lungs easily, filling me with a sense of boundless, unburdened space. I said, turning to look at him with a faint, genuine smile, like I finally closed the door. Derek brought the car to a stop at the red light, turned his head, and smiled back, sharp, brilliant, and completely mine. Good, he said, pressing a gentle kiss to the back of my hand. Now let's go. Have New Year's dinner with people who actually know how to use a doorknob.